Welcome to Wild Turkey Science, a podcast made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow. I'm Dr. Marcus Lashley, Professor of Wildlife Ecology at the University of Florida.
And I'm Dr. Will Goolsby, Professor of Wildlife Ecology and Management at Auburn University. We're both lifelong hunters and devoted scientists who are passionate about hunting, managing, and researching wild turkeys.
In this podcast, we'll explore turkey research, speak to the experts in the field, and address the difficult questions related to wild turkey ecology and management.
Our goal
is to serve as your connection to wild turkey science.
Can you repeat that rant that you just went on?
No, I'm not going to repeat it.
I wanted all of our listeners to know the right way to hunt a turkey.
No. Well,
and by that I should say, I need to clarify. Marcus was not sharing a story about violating any kind of regulations or doing anything unethical. We had just finished up, just sharing our personal opinions on hunting approaches, let's just say.
Well, and I think you should provide some other context. We commonly bounce results off of each other to kind of get a reaction to see, like, hey, what do you think about these results? And I had shown you some from we're working on a relative density estimation of turkeys range-wide, and I showed you some of the results that'll be coming soon. So hopefully I'll be able to make that public soon.
Yeah, when that map comes, our listeners are going to eat that map alive. I mean, they're not. I shouldn't have said eat it alive. They're going to eat it up. They're going to love it.
Oh yeah, and that I'm trying to get a few eyes on it to see if it makes sense. But then Will, you shared some data that you were trying to get my opinion on, and it led us down this path where we then, kind of gave some opinions on how we think we should deal with things. So I don't want to put anybody on the edge of their seat, but we got some cool stuff coming.
Yeah, that's right.
So
getting back to the kind of the topic at hand and what we're going to talk about today, we kicked around several ideas, and I think where we landed was that it's going to be a little bit of a hodgepodge. You agree? There's a few different topics we thought y'all would want to hear about, but we've also been getting a lot of positive listener feedback that they enjoy some of these episodes that I guess maybe you could call them a little bit more laid back, not as technical.
Yeah, maybe a little more philosophical and thought-provoking and a little less technical. And
yeah. I mean, we just don't have a lot of time to back and forth and share opinions when we have a guest on and we're trying to deep dive on a technical issue.
Yeah,
so these episodes,
when we have some new data, or we're doing a deep dive on the literature, it's harder to, you
don't have a lot of space.
Yeah. That more flexible conversation.
Right. So, one of those first topics that you came up with to lead with is being technique-driven versus outcome-driven in turkey management.
Yeah, I think we touched on that a little bit in the last episode, but I was telling you what brought that to my attention. I've been thinking about how I teach habitat management, and it just kind of hit me. We tend to have this focus on techniques, like evaluating techniques.
Yeah, like everybody wants to know when to burn, how to burn, how often to burn,
right?
How to spray, when to spray, what to spray. Yeah, all that stuff.
Which herbicide is good or bad? Like
where to cut trees, how many trees to cut.
And then we always say it depends, and that's because it's depending on outcome. What is the desirable outcome, and then how do you achieve it in different situations? Yeah. And it just kind of struck me as an interesting way to think about that from a more of a philosophical standpoint. It's like we're evaluating those techniques instead of evaluating outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality of the situation, and I think that's what's at least the feedback that I got. People really appreciated us providing some of that context and taking a step back and saying, "Listen, like there's a lot of ways to do this, and there's not a one approach that's going to be effective everywhere." Right? You can apply fire, but the context you're in might result in a different outcome. Really, where I, I, I guess I kind of started thinking we should try to focus efforts on learning on how to evaluate outcomes. Just, I think it's valuable for us to just reflect on things like that sometimes.
Yeah.
It's not that this practice is good and that practice is bad. It's this outcome is what we're trying to achieve. And did we achieve it or not? And if not, is there another strategy that we could take, whether it be altering the use of the tool, the same tool, or changing tools or changing areas? It's really about developing knowledge on how to evaluate the outcome.
Right.
So did you create high quality brooding cover? Do you have the correct composition of plants and structure that you're trying to accomplish? And the knowledge focus, in terms of learning, should be, I think it would be better served, I guess, if we focused on that outcome and being able to evaluate the outcome.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think the other thing that people should be thinking of, and many of them do, because I get questions about this, but maybe I keep getting them because we still don't really have a good answer. But they always ask, how much of that do I need? And that,
Yeah.
like I said, is the harder question to answer.
Well, I think that, we're kind of taking a step back now, right? And
Yeah.
thinking, wait a minute, where should we allocate resources? Part of that is thinking about what should we be evaluating in terms of the outcomes. But yeah, you're right. Like, it's hard to know how much you need of something because it's dependent on other things.
And yeah, and that's my point is I think you need to know what your goal is for how much of it you want. And instead of, staying so abstract, let's just use an example like brooding cover, right?
Right.
Like what percentage of my property needs to be in brooding cover? That can help you prioritize and efficiently allocate your time. If
Then
right? Because if you determine you have enough of it, then you move on to something else. But if not, that's what you focus on. You need to
yeah,
do the same thing with year-round forage and cover needs, right?
yeah. I think another
Make sure
problem
it's
of
present in every season.
taking a step back is, okay, you've got 200 acres. Well, maybe brooding cover is limited on your property, but maybe the entire landscape is full of it.
Yeah.
It may not be as much of a priority in that circumstance. I think that's probably rare, given you and I and several others that we've talked to, and the research, data-driven inference from multiple studies suggests that poult rearing cover is probably very limited on the landscape in most contexts.
Yeah, and the smaller the property that I have, the more I'm going to prioritize attraction over year-round needs. And because early succession is so limiting on the landscape and because turkeys are so drawn to it during hunting season, I might, if I have a smaller property, as that property scale goes down, I might place greater emphasis on providing early successional cover so that I have the greatest probability of bringing turkeys to my property during the hunting season.
So you might be influencing productivity to some degree, but your objective is more about attraction. And you may want to cut this out, and we can do that if you want to. But what does your data on gobbling show from your current study? That was, if I
Yeah,
recall, the most
it showed
important
that
factor.
yeah, it showed gobbling increased, all the way up to 25% early successional cover at the property scale.
Yeah, and then maybe I'm misremembering this, but wasn't that the most important factor
Yeah.
affecting gobbling?
Yeah, the property, so we had I think it was a total of 11 properties in the study, and the one with the most gobbling had the most early succession,
And the one with the least
percentage
gobbling,
wise.
the
Percentage
one,
wise.
yeah, and the one with the least gobbling had the least.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, yeah, and then you found a significant relationship with as you increase early succession, you increase gobbling, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's a good example right there. We talk about early succession regularly because of poult rearing, but maybe you just want, maybe you just want to hear more gobbling, and you may not have control of enough acreage to really influence productivity, but doesn't mean that you can't still influence attractiveness.
You know what I love about that situation, though, is that it's a win-win in the sense that you're satisfying your own selfish motives of having more
Yeah,
turkeys to potentially harvest in the spring, but you're also providing a limited resource across the landscape, and you're turning
yeah,
your property into a turkey factory.
yeah. I think that's a good point, and I tend to like that as well because it gets people, regardless of their motive, to do it.
hmm But
Right?
you flip the script, right? Because most people you talk to will tell you that they see turkeys all the time during deer season, but not during turkey season. And that's because they have fall winter habitat, not spring summer habitat.
Yeah,
So this is what we're talking about is flipping the script.
yeah. So you could influence attractiveness by improving poult rearing cover or providing more of it.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this to some degree. It's often a barrier to get people to do it that they don't think they have a large enough footprint to make an impact.
Yeah.
So maybe that's true, but if everybody has that selfish motive that we're going to make early succession to have more attractiveness during the season on my land, and everybody has 100 acres, well, you're then starting to make a big impact
hmm
collectively if even though it's driven by selfish motive in that
Yeah.
point. And I'm not saying selfish in a negative connotation. I'm just it's about your experience instead of about the bird necessarily.
Yeah.
I don't mean that to be negative.
Yeah.
Like, I like to have turkeys attracted to my place just like everybody
But
else.
that's why I think it's a beautiful thing, in contrast, you could contrast this or juxtapose it, I guess, against somebody that's trying to bait the turkeys onto their property during
I
turkey
was just
season.
thinking, now it's
That
completely,
that's the selfish way to do it.
yeah, yeah. Well, and it's the same motive, but you don't get the same outcome, right?
Right.
In the early succession, not only are you making it more attractive, you're also enhancing productivity.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be like a fun little I mean, we neither of us would ever do this because it would be such a waste. Oh, not a waste. It wouldn't be a waste of time, but it would not be an efficient use of our time. But wouldn't it be really interesting though to take two what we would consider pretty poor quality turkey properties and then just bait one and see how many turkeys we get on camera in there during turkey season, and then actually go in and do habitat improvements on the other and see how many we get in there.
That
I
would
don't
be
know.
cool.
It'd just be fun to do stuff like that. But
I wish
um,
we could. I wish we could just
yeah.
intelligently tinker.
But we really need to be focused more so on, limiting factors at the population scale.
Well, maybe that's another approach to we could start thinking about, well, what are ways that we can solve both objectives
Yeah.
simultaneously, like make your property more attractive by making it more productive.
And I think the first argument you're likely to hear if you propose that to people is that they may not be able to create early succession where they hunt, right? And that's difficult. I mean, like, what are you going to do? We've talked about, maybe some places that you could do it.
Maybe you alter your food plot plan
Yeah.
so that it better accomplishes
Yeah,
both.
we've talked about some strategies if you want to go back and listen to those episodes, so we don't necessarily need to rehash that now. Um, but the other thing I feel like the other barrier to entry for people to create more early succession is they don't feel like they have enough acreage to, attract a commercial timber harvest, or they don't have large equipment or anything like that to do it with, but that is, we've talked about several techniques on this show before too. That doesn't necessarily have to be a barrier either. There's things that you can use like herbicide injection with FSI to create it very cheaply. And in fact, that would be an interesting component to add to that little hypothetical study we were joking about a second ago. Is let's compare the expense that you would have to, the cost per turkey attracted to the property with corn versus with the early succession you created, and I think it
I
could
love
still
that corn
it's
has to come into every
still be
single
cheap.
episode.
You know what? You're the second person that said that to me today.
Somebody else told you they love that happens?
I brought up corn with Ted DeVos earlier today. And they said the same exact thing. It always gets back to corn with you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And maybe that's a good segue to talk about my new project.
Yeah. Well, we have some things on the horizon that are going to be exciting.
Yeah.
So, well, I know, I don't know if you liked the idea, but we've talked a lot about data gaps, and you and I both have gotten, some various sources of funding to address some of those. I didn't know if you want to get into some of that.
Yeah, so the one that I was just teasing about a little bit, and that can help us address a big data gap. Y'all are, drum roll please, right? Y'all are all going to be so surprised. I'm doing a wildlife feeding study, and so the gist of it is, I'm frustrated by not having the direct data to speak specifically to how feeding corn potentially changes the predator-prey dynamic on a property where turkeys are an objective, right? I want that data set. And so I'm going after it in this project. I just got news. The Alabama Wildlife Federation, Turkeys for Tomorrow, and the Alabama chapter of the NWTF couldn't be more appreciative to all three of those organizations for letting me know this week that they are going to fund the work. And we're going to compare raccoon and possum densities on fed and unfed sites. We're actually going to manipulate the density of feeders on the site. So we're going to have some areas with more and some areas with fewer. We're going to also manipulate when the feeders are feeding. So we're going to have some sites that are going to be fed year round. And in that case, that's kind of trying to look for, like what is the potential maximum influence that feeding can have on turkey nest predators. And then we'll have some areas that are just set up to feed during deer season, like a lot of people are doing right now. So that's, relevant real world stuff.
Well, I think that's one thing that comes up a lot from people that engage me on this issue is, well, I understand how that could be problematic to feed all year, but what if I just do it during deer season while I
That's right.
And is that going to be all corn?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's exactly why I put that in the study, is because so many people feed that way. So I wanted to have information on how that, what that practice does to predator communities or not, right?
Yeah. One thing I really love about that is it seems like, and we've talked about this before, the focus, like if you talk about feeding being an issue with turkeys, immediately the only issue that seems to be important to anybody or brought up is aflatoxin.
Yeah.
It's like that's the only possible problem.
Right.
So this is another one that we have talked about at great length, and I think I'm glad you got the funding to address it directly.
Yeah. Yeah. So on all of those sites, and across all that wide range of conditions that we'll be evaluating, we'll be looking at differences in survival of the predators, differences in reproduction, differences in population growth rates, abundance, areas of use. So does feeding cause them to spend more time in where areas are more likely to turkeys are more likely to nest, for example? So we're trying to look at the predator community very comprehensively. In fact, I'm hopeful that we may even be able to use some autonomous recording units, the gobble recorders that we've talked about so much on this show before, for other, in their use in other research projects. But I'm hoping to use those too to actually keep tabs on the aerial predator community as well, because I think that increased prevalence of feed on the landscape can increase the prey base for those raptors, and those raptors, of course, if they're more attracted
Mhm.
to the site, have greater local abundance, then that may influence predation rates on turkeys as well. So we're going to do all that, and then we're going to do some aflatoxin monitoring too, because
Yeah,
you
that
mentioned you
that
mentioned
I
it.
think is
So
really cool.
yeah,
So, not that you're gonna completely ignore that issue, I just think that and I don't know that it's all misplaced, but that has been the focal topic of concern,
yeah.
and I don't know that that's necessarily the one that we should be most concerned about.
Well, as evidence of the way that I think about it, it is a it is not the primary objective of this study.
Yeah.
So
Right.
I mean, I
It's
place way
taking
greater.
advantage. Yeah, you're
Yeah,
taking advantage of the opportunity to get more data,
yes, I
but
want more aflatoxin data so we know from the really excellent work done at Mississippi State before, when corn grows aflatoxin, what the concentrations are, best practices to reduce it as far as timing of feeding and the way that you distribute the feed. And what I want to do is take that one step further and actually try to document turkey use of corn and see how much are they consuming that it has aflatoxin above toxic thresholds.
yeah, really cool stuff. Much needed work, and you know what? I really hope it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, I do, but I also at the same time would not be surprised at all if we find and there's an important thing I think for people to keep in mind too is that's the experiment is not set up to determine whether or not predation rates are influenced by this. So we're just looking at,
Yeah,
predator abundance in the areas they use. And that's all going to be kind of circumstantial evidence that we could use to predict how they make inferences about how that might affect turkeys.
yeah,
But overall, we're just trying to understand how are we changing the ecology of the turkey predator community.
yeah. And the answer to that may be not at all,
Right.
or
But I could easily see abundance being twofold greater on fed sites
yeah, I could see it being substantially different.
because you talk to raccoon trappers and all of them say, if they're raccoon trappers, they want to go trap a fed property.
Yeah,
And
wherever
I don't
feed.
know how much of that is just because their movements are more concentrated around feeders versus how much of it is maybe associated with greater densities.
You know, I don't know the details of the study design or anything, but something that came to mind that might be really interesting is you could establish the home range as like, what is the habitat of an individual, like habitat use look like of an individual raccoon,
Mhm.
and then put a feeder in it and see how it
Mhm.
moves.
Yeah.
Like, and I
Well,
think that's
it
relevant
is.
because you might be able to move them a what, like, you could be more deliberate about where you place them to at least make sure you're not moving the activity to nesting
Yeah.
cover.
Yeah. And I think we might be able to get at that. The we are going to be putting some VHF collars on raccoons. And so, hopefully in this first year of the study, we're not going to have any feeders out. So that's going to be the before year to establish the baseline. And hopefully we'll have some individuals that we track movements of in both years.
Yeah,
So we should have some that are where we can look at their before and after, not only where their home range was located, but its composition as well. So I'm super interested to see if the proportion of upland to bottomland habitat within a raccoon's home range changes on a fed site.
hmm,
I would expect that feeders probably increase the proportion or the representation of upland, cover types in their home ranges
yeah. I suspect that
if the
that's
feeders are in the uplands. Yeah,
yeah, that's what I would predict.
yeah.
It's interesting too. We've been talking about this issue various times and the data gap, and you've gotten that funding. I know Chitwood in at Oklahoma State. I think they're working on something like that. I don't know if it's been funded officially or not, but I would think that he's got something funded to address some similar questions related to feeding as it relates
hmm
to turkeys. I don't know the details of his project.
That'll be awesome once he gets some more of that ironed out to see if there's any way that we can collect data that'll be complementary.
Yeah. Well, that's what I've talked to you about. I talked to him about.
Yeah.
We need to make sure that we aren't duplicating effort necessarily, but doing things very complementary, because I also successfully got a grant to look at the problem, and I know that what you and I are doing, and I'm pretty sure that what we are doing along with what Coulter is doing is very complementary.
Yeah.
Because my project is focused on linking actual tagged turkeys' vital rates, so predation and movement ecology and nesting success and all those things, actually looking at whether or not feeding is influencing any of those factors when you do feed through the reproductive season.
Yep.
So I'll be tracking turkeys and their vital rates.
Well, the great thing about that too is that study gets us closer to what we really want to know.
Yeah.
But the power of having both studies is that the information is closer to what you're really interested in. But in addition to that, my study will help with revealing some mechanisms by which those changes are elicited.
Which we have the ARUs and cameras associated with the feeders.
Yeah.
Like you do. So we'll have a characterization of the predator community.
Yeah.
But, like you said, you're not addressing predation. Well, I can address that with this study. So it's complementary in that way. But we won't be addressing how the feeding's affecting the reproduction and survival of the predator community, which you will be doing. So they're very complementary, even though they have some overlap.
That's right.
And I just can't remember the details of the Oklahoma work. But I think that's another piece of it. There's some overlap, but there's another piece of the puzzle that they'll be working on simultaneously. So really exciting to be able to address that issue and see.
Absolutely.
Is it something we should be worried about or not?
Yep. We didn't talk about this ahead of time. So here you did that. You gave me this out, so I'll give you the out too. We can go back and cut this if you want to. But if you're ready to talk about it, I would like for you to talk about your big state grant and how that
You mean the appropriation?
Yeah, I mean that's a huge deal, and the reason that I want you to talk about it is because you're going to be humble about it, but I'll just go ahead and get it out of the way and say that this is going to significantly change the field of turkey research. This is a major moment.
Well, I think we're still at the stage that we will see. So
I told you all he'd be humble.
Well, the problem we keep talking about over and over is we have concerns about the resource and figuring out ways to fund different things. Like, for example, what I just talked to you, I got a grant through the National Wild Turkey Federation. They're going to support that study that I just mentioned. It also has a component where we're going to scour the literature and try to collate all of the information that we have currently on the effects of habitat on turkeys. So that's a part of that grant. So that's awesome when you get that opportunity, and I'm getting to address two things that are very important to me and that I think are important to the resource, right?
Right.
But the reality of the situation is that it's really difficult to align funding with what you think is needed sometimes. Yeah. Right? It's hard to find the right mechanism and have it be consistent enough. So we've been exploring alternative ways to go about that, and my lab really has been non-traditional in terms of the way that I've found funding in the past. A lot of it has been through private donations and various things like that. But the exciting news now, and I know some people have asked what's going on because they saw these positions being announced, but I am hiring. Now, I've already hired quite a few postdocs, and I have several other positions that are being hired through a new funding mechanism, at least new to me. And basically, the Florida legislature recognized that there's a strong need and concern around this resource, and they, through an appropriation, put some funding toward a larger effort, more comprehensive effort to understand what's affecting turkey populations across Florida and the value of habitat connectivity, particularly through the Florida Wildlife Corridor. And also, parts of the effort will include optimizing habitat management practices and delivering those practices to landowners through podcasts or field days, site visits, those kinds of things. All of that is like this comprehensive plan to assess what's going on with turkey populations, what are problems, what do we need, and then specifically do research to address those issues and find the mechanisms to make sure that it gets into the head of as many people that can use it for the sake of the resource as possible. And it's really exciting, like you said, because it's a fundamental change in the way that this kind
and
of
it's
stuff.
amount of money to do what you need to do to answer those questions.
Right, and I don't want to say that it's like completely wide open, like it's focused on turkeys, and I gave them a really comprehensive plan of what I would do and what I needed to do it. But it does provide enough flexibility to target things that, like, for example, when we're doing some of the broad scale monitoring, we may find, oh, wow, this is a real problem. And then we have enough flexibility to design work to address that specific problem.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's the frustrating thing about it is, in a normal situation, what would happen is we'd have one study funded, we would make that interesting observation that we want to look into further. And so there's a time lag. You put a proposal together to try to get that funded, you shop it around. Probably, long story short, by the time the research is even implemented, much less concluded and written up, that process can take, many times longer than with, your situation now. You have you're able to be a lot more nimble, I think is probably the key word there. And you're able to do things chronologically and build upon. I mean, that's what every scientist wants, right? Is to build that continuity into their program so that they know that they have a consistent funding stream, and you can actually start designing experiments that last the rest of your career and build on each other.
Well, I think that's an important point. And the other thing I want to reiterate, I have a close working relationship with the State Wildlife Agency in Florida. I cannot talk enough about how much I appreciate the colleagues that I have with the state agency, and they have this really strong interest in supporting research and making research decisions, and we have collaborations ongoing, and this is just expanding that so that we can have an even more comprehensive effort in collaboration. It's just like opening another door, because our traditional model really was reliant on the state agency, and they've been carrying all the weight.
That's right.
And this is allowing us to expand without the burden all being on them to do it.
Yeah, and the tough thing for them too is that their objectives are very different from the private landowner's objective, and
in many cases,
and not always. Sometimes they're perfectly intertwined, right? I should have.
And then they have, they have factions of the agency that are completely focused on the private landowner, right? Or at least in some agencies.
But the point that I was trying to make and failed, obviously, was that oftentimes a state, the research that they're going to fund is catered more towards meeting those high level objectives. Like if the state needs to know, statewide abundance for monitoring purposes, so that they can make adjustments to regional seasons and frameworks and bag limits and things
Mhm.
like that. That is very important to the sustainability of the turkey population within the state. It's very important to hunter satisfaction and ensuring the continuity of that. But it's not very necessarily going to directly benefit a private landowner in knowing how to make more turkeys on his property, right?
Right. Or, it may be outside of their purview to fund efforts to deliver the information directly to landowners,
Yeah. It is
right?
sometimes, but I have seen states fund that type of research because, like you said, they do have technical assistance programs that need that
Right.
information too.
That's right. It is, sometimes it works that way and sometimes it doesn't.
Right.
But I think the point here is it's not, that is not diminishing or sidestepping the value of the agency and the role that they're playing, and they're still carrying a huge amount of weight. But this is providing additional opportunity to expand the effort so that we
Right.
can do what's best for the resource.
That's right.
And it's really cool to be a part of it and see how it works, and it may become a model to replicate in other states.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you as a turkey nerd, I'm giddy. I'm glad. I'm happy for you, and I'm glad that you got that because I think like I said, it's gonna free you up to do a lot of the things we haven't been able to do.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line.
Well, it's also really, really cool. Like I told you, I've already hired a suite of postdocs. Well, they have all kinds of backgrounds. They're all brilliant scientists in their own right with skill sets and interest, and having that kind of
Every
team.
one of them is smarter than us.
Oh my God, it's not even comparable. Like
I
why?
guarantee it.
Why?
I haven't even. I've only met one of them, but I can still say that statement with some certainty.
Yeah, and I think that soon people will start seeing some of this because a lot of our
Mhm.
capacity has just gone through the roof. So,
Yeah.
like some of our online efforts, uh, the amount of content that we'll be able to put out, all of our capacity. We have various training things that we want to make available, not just within Florida, but potentially to everyone in some
Yeah.
cases. Like there's lots of things that people will start to see soon.
Yeah.
Like it'll be really visible, and I mean that's ultimately what I want. I want to develop really good information and get it to a lot of people. And so it is exciting. It's a little bit scary, you know. So
I know what you mean, but on the net, definitely
yeah.
a good thing.
So I mentioned, I think on the last episode or maybe a couple episodes ago that we were trying to start a pulp imprinting
Yep.
study. We are. I mean that's funded. It just and it's through this
Mhm.
program.
Right.
But it's not as easy as just buying a few poults and putting them in the backyard. Like there's a lot
Right.
of stuff to work out. So
Yeah.
we're in that process now.
Anytime you start housing poultry, man,
Yeah,
it gets
especially for
complicated.
research
Yeah.
purposes. There's a different suite of issues that we have to deal with, and
Right.
we've got a great team together to work on that. And then one of the things that I think I've talked about some, we don't have some basic information in Florida. Like we've never had an annual hen survival estimate.
Mhm.
We need that. That's an important
Yeah.
part of the demographic model.
Yeah,
We
that's
are
a very
generating
important parameter to model what a population's doing.
the project that I'm working on in collaboration with the FWC now. We are going to generate that on 2 sites, and those will be the first estimates in the state. But the appropriation is going to allow us to expand to several more sites, so we get a better coverage and a better feel across the state for vital rates like that
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
And we also have a component that's focused on genetics, and in particular, understanding how connectivity is affecting genetic viability in populations.
Mm-hmm.
That is going to be pretty awesome. So a lot of the focus is about getting the vital rates that we need to understand what's going on with populations, and then figuring out the optimal ways to manage habitat and everything and deliver that to people, but also trying to measure the impact of connectivity and how we can optimize it. Because in Florida, if y'all out there haven't heard of this or have never looked into it, you should go look into it, because it's a pretty awesome initiative in the state of Florida. It's called the Florida Wildlife Corridor. And this is connected to it because basically the initiative, and it is an act now. This was a bipartisan effort in the state of Florida for conservation.
Kudos to Florida, man.
I know, it's really cool. It's this massive effort to protect land, and that doesn't just mean acquire it and make it public. There's also various types of easements, various ways that this is occurring, but the Florida corridor is in its entirety, including the public land and the private land that is not currently developed. We have connected, we'll call it turkey habitat, but it's, just not developed land, from the Everglades all the way to Georgia, all the way over to Alabama, across the Panhandle.
Maybe some of those Osceolas will start taking that and walking up into Alabama.
Well, the corridor wasn't initiated for turkeys, but I think there's no question in my mind that it is a really big benefit. And, that part of it is the effort is linking the turkey populations to that. But, you should go check that out. It kind of is crazy to me that exists in Florida.
It is to me too, because I immediately, when I think of Florida, I always think of high development.
Yeah. When that's true, and, there's a couple of population centers for cities, and then the coastline is really developed. But this is basically going up the spine of the peninsula and across the Panhandle.
Yeah.
And I don't remember exactly. I think it's about 18 million acres or something like that, roughly.
Yeah.
It'll say, if you look this up, you'll see. But I do remember this stat. Since people like us to measure things in state sizes, I was looking at it, and I was like, I wonder in what context is this? Like, I need to understand how much is 18 million acres.
Well, Alabama's what, 32?
Yeah, so it's like a little over half in Alabama, but it's basically the size of South Carolina.
Golly.
So think about that for a minute. Florida has connected undeveloped land currently in the state. I think about 12 of the 18 million is already in a perpetual protection. We have the state of South Carolina within the state in connected undeveloped.
Florida just set aside an area the size of South Carolina and said, hey, critters, just go live there.
And it doesn't mean it's not impacted by humans at all, but and some of it is not in a perpetual protective protection. Like it's
a hodgepodge that they have worked very diligently to piece together, and understanding that they're going to have to, I imagine that they had to make some concessions here, compromises there. Some of the lands are probably completely protected. Some of them probably have very light protections and everything in between.
Right. Yeah. So it's what's considered the vision for the corridor, I guess, as it stands. Some of it is protected perpetually because it's public.
Yeah.
And that might be wildlife agency or forestry agency or the water management district. We got all kinds of options, right? Some of it is private land that's still working land, like they, farm cattle on it or have timber or whatever, but it's under a perpetual easement.
Right.
and some of it is currently undeveloped, but it's vulnerable, I guess,
Yeah.
because it doesn't have a perpetual protection. So somebody could sell it to a developer, and then it could end up being housing,
Yeah.
so, or
So
something.
basically anything that's not in the water in Florida.
Yeah, and I think it's important because the value of the land for development is so high.
Yeah.
That was really visionary,
Yeah. It really was.
and it's pretty cool to be here and have be playing a small part of it. I've largely not accomplished anything as it relates to the corridor, but I really admire all the people and agencies and everything, and NGOs and everything that have been involved to come up, to have that vision and accomplish a pretty remarkable thing. And then, like I said, as a bipartisan choice to enshrine that in law, so that
Yeah.
there's funding for the Florida Wildlife Corridor.
Right.
So this money is specific to turkeys, but it's connected because I think the future of turkey populations in Florida are ultimately connected to that effort.
Yeah. It's almost impossible for me to believe that a project like that can happen in, 2024.
Yeah,
Setting aside that much land,
yeah.
I
It
mean, I
is
know it
just
started
remarkable.
way before now, and we're seeing the payoff on many, many years of many people working diligently.
Right.
But at
Which
the same
I don't want to take any credit for it. I did
Yeah,
not have anything to do with any of it.
but at the same time, wow, it's just
Yeah,
crazy.
pretty remarkable.
So sorry I didn't prep you to talk about that at all today, but one of the things we said we would talk about what we were up to. So I figured that was probably a pretty big one for you.
Yeah, it is, and I've kind of been holding it close,
Mhm.
um, you know, but a lot of people have been asking questions because I've been uh, sending out job applications every day, basically,
Yeah.
or announcements. I mean,
Well, Marcus, I don't mean to brag, but I did buy a tractor yesterday.
don't even talk to me about that.
You're over here getting your
I'm gonna have to buy a
your
bigger
state
tractor.
appropriation, and I got a tractor for my lab, but I'm happy.
Yeah,
No, I
but
think I think that's gonna be really cool.
yeah, and it was really cool because it was cool to see the hunting community get behind it. The Wild Turkey Federation and the
It
state.
spans a lot of different interest groups.
Yeah, the several organizations that are interested in wildlife conservation and preserving our hunting heritage and you know various other aspects of this. It was really cool to see everybody
Mhm.
you know uh, come together behind that mission to help that
Absolutely.
happen. And hopefully it's not currently uh, it per, it's not currently perpetual, but that's the vision
Right.
is to make it such that it's a recurring appropriation. And that's another thing for people to think about. If you care a lot about turkeys, let your legislators know that,
Mhm.
right? If you care
Yeah, I
about
mean, that's not something people typically think of.
yeah, like that's ultimately what happened. There's so much support, there's concern, and people care a lot. And
Yeah.
you know, not only do I hope everybody that hears this that appreciates that they did that, reach out and let them know how much you appreciate it,
Mhm.
but keep that in mind that you can voice your opinion.
Yeah.
Let
Maybe,
the legislators know what you want.
maybe send a little note to your, state congressman or senator and say, just give them a little blurb. I mean, just say, "Hey, look, I heard about Florida doing this for turkey conservation. Thought maybe this was something that we could do in our state."
Yeah, and um it I think it makes a lot of sense. It's a good model.
It
It's a
is.
relatively, I mean, it's just like a real a fraction of the overall budget,
Yeah.
but it has the potential to be really important, not just for turkeys, but, a lot of this stuff is going to be really impactful to wildlife in general.
Hmm. And for people to understand how unprecedented this is, I don't personally know anyone else that has ever gotten a state appropriation for research funding. So
Yeah, and
it's
this,
a
to be clear,
exceptional.
this is research, teaching, and extension.
Yeah.
So all
Right.
inclusive. But
Yeah.
yeah, you're right. I'm not aware of another one like this. We do have another one that's similar with the Wisely Lab.
Hmm.
That's similar thing.
Right.
But in fact, it was the precedent that was used for the legislators to move forward on this one.
Gotcha.
So
Well, cool.
yeah,
Do
a
you have
lot of cool
anything else
things
you wanted
coming.
to? Huh?
A lot of cool things coming because of that.
Oh, absolutely. I'm not moving to Florida yet. um,
I got to figure out a way to endow the institute first.
I'm just gonna quit my tenure track job and come be a postdoc for you, Marcus. Was there anything else you
Well,
wanted to talk?
if I can figure out a way to make it perpetual, then it'll come with multiple faculty lines.
There you go. What are we missing talking about today? We covered a lot of different ground. I don't
Yeah, I
know
think
about a lot of ground, but different ground.
well, and I'd like to have some feedback from the audience on this because really we didn't talk a lot about anything very actionable, I guess, today, and we kind of gotten some feedback to suggest people like to just kind of know what's going on and hear us talk
Yeah.
about various things like this and what we have on the horizon. And, if you like this kind of content, then let us know. If you don't like it, let us know.
Yeah. Because both of us, I mean, I think, well, I'll just speak for myself, but um, I worry a little bit when we do episodes like this that people feel like they're not getting, we're not upholding our name, Wild
Yeah.
Turkey Science, and they're coming on here to get, expecting a information dense episode, you know, to hear us kind of, waxing philosophical on some of these different topics or just talking
Yeah.
about what we're up to. I hope they still feel like that brings value of some sort.
Yeah. Well, and also, like,
But if it doesn't, like you said,
example,
let us know.
what we just talked about, I've basically not even told anybody,
Yeah.
about what's going on because I don't want it to sound like I'm tooting my own horn. I think it's going to be great for turkeys,
Yeah.
but I, I just didn't want to, but like make it sound like I'm bragging about it or something. That's just something that I happen to be positioned to help facilitate. So,
Well, that's why I asked you about it because I knew you wouldn't.
well, I mean, I've known about it a while and I've never brought it up
Yeah.
outside of or any public
Yeah.
in any public arena.
It's a big deal for turkeys, though. This is a big deal.
Well, I think what is yet to be seen is how sustainable will it be and can it
Right.
be replicated? And if that happens, then I agree with you. I think that'll be a game changer, not just for
Uh,
turkeys either.
I think it'll be impactful. I mean, it'll be more impactful if that happens, but I think you know, it's gonna have an impact either way. But I mean, just like you talking about building that turkey facility. I just can't even like that's like a Christmas present, having that resource.
Yeah.
And there's
Well,
so
and
many of these questions that we have about, flock dynamics and social hierarchies and all that kind of stuff. And once we have that, we can make it happen. We can play out any scenario we want.
yeah. Well, it has a really strong potential. So, if folks are listening out there and you were part of helping make that happen, I really do appreciate it.
Yeah. Don't screw it up, Marcus.
Ah, pressure.
I had to throw that in there.
Yeah. No, I feel like that. It's unfortunately that's what I'm feeling, lots of pressure.
Yeah.
It's
we know
overwhelming the excitement.
Yeah. We know you're gonna exceed expectations.
Well,
you just haven't realized that yet.
I think I already exceeded expectations. You know, my mom is, every time I see her, she's like, I just cannot believe what you're doing.
She can't believe that you just make enough money to put food on the table.
Yeah, she thought I was just going to
Be in jail.
feral, I guess. Like, I never thought you'd make anything of yourself. Yeah, you know what? One time it just kind of came out, but we'll leave everybody with this. I told somebody, and I can't recall exactly who it was at the moment. Said, you know what? You should strive, be underestimated. And he looked at me like, what do you mean? It's like, well, that means you always exceed expectations. So good stuff.
Overpromise no. That's the opposite, right?
Yeah.
Overpromise, underdeliver. That, yeah.
Yeah.
Man, we probably need to end this one.
Yeah, we're digressing. All right, folks. Like always, we really appreciate everybody, all your support, all the feedback that we're getting, everybody that's rated the podcast. We really appreciate it. So,
did we have something to give away today?
I was waiting on you, man.
Or have too many people turned it off at this point?
No, we can give it away. Somebody's
we're out of stuff.
Okay, yeah, I just
Brian, you may have something.
No, I forwarded you the last one, the person, the reach out.
Yeah, I got him taken care of. It was like, whenever we start this back again, or, you know, please reach out to us as soon as you listen to the episode. And maybe that's what people are doing. They're listening to it weeks and weeks later, you know, because I feel like there's some of those we don't ever hear anything. And I worry that we're going to put the prize back in the hopper and give it to somebody else and then have somebody come and say, oh, you called me out.
Yeah.
So,
well,
but if that happens, I'll send you a signed Post-it note. Don't worry.
That's going to be worth something one day.
One day. Just hold on to it long enough.
Yeah. We will have something next week.
Cool.
So, all right. Thanks, everybody.
Wild Turkey Science is part of the Natural Resources University podcast network and is made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow, a grassroots organization dedicated to the wild turkey. To learn more about TFT, check out turkeysfortomorrow.org.